My name is Nell, to the three people left alive who actually know me, and I am 63 years old. For 30 years, I put liars in prison for a living. I could spot a fake confession from across a courtroom, so you'd think I'd have seen this coming. But the people who finally got me weren't strangers. They were my own son and his wife. And they made their move on the one day they knew I'd be too broken to fight back, the day I drove up the mountain to scatter my husband's ashes. They were wrong about one thing, though. They thought grief made me weak. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. My name is Eleanor Whitlock. I'm 63, and 1 year ago to the day, I lost the only person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to be the strong one. His name was Walter, 41 years married. He was the kind of man who measured a board 3 times and still cut it slow, just to be sure. The cabin outside Estes Park, Colorado, the one this whole story is about, he built it with his own 2 hands over 4 summers, while I drove up on weekends with sandwiches and bad coffee and watched him sweat through his shirts. He framed the porch the year Adam started high school. He set the last roof beam the year I made senior prosecutor. Every knot in every plank of that place had a date attached to it, and I knew them all. When the cancer finally took him, the only thing I asked of the world was time. Time to be quiet. Time to figure out who Eleanor Whitlock was when she wasn't somebody's wife, or somebody's prosecutor, or somebody's mother. I had the ashes in a cedar box on my passenger seat. I'd promised Walter I'd take him up to the ridge behind the cabin, where the aspens go gold in October, and let him go where the wind could find him. That was the plan. Just the 2 of us one last time. No announcement, no family, no noise. I should tell you that the quiet hadn't felt right for the last couple of months before that drive. Adam, my son, he's 34 now, had gone strange on me. His texts got short: busy mom, talk soon, love you. The kind of thing you send when you don't want to actually talk. And Brooke, his wife, had just stopped answering altogether. I'd call, it'd ring 4 times, then straight to voicemail. I told myself people grieve differently. I told myself maybe they were giving me space. I'm a smart woman, and I let myself believe a stupid thing because the alternative hurt too much to hold while I was still burying my husband. Here's a lesson I'll give you for free before any of the rest of it. When somebody pulls away from you right when you're at your weakest, that's not them giving you space. That's them clearing the room. The drive up was beautiful, and I hate that it was. It had rained for 2 days, and the whole canyon smelled like wet pine and cold stone. The aspens were just starting to turn. I had the window cracked, even though it was 45 degrees, because Walter always drove with the window down, and I wanted the cabin to smell like the kind of day he'd have loved. The gravel road crunched under my tires the way it had 1,000 times. My shoulders were finally starting to come down from around my ears. And then I came around the last bend before the property, and everything in me went cold. There was a sign at the mouth of my driveway, white, professional, staked into my dirt. Coming soon, a real estate sign. Under the headline, Smawson and Associates, Luxury Mountain Properties, and a phone number I didn't recognize, and a glossy little photo of my cabin, shot from the angle Walter always said had the best light. I want to be precise about what I felt, because I spent a career teaching juries to distrust people who exaggerate. It wasn't shock. Shock is loud. This was the opposite. It was the quiet, dropping feeling you get when a piece of evidence you didn't want to be true clicks into place, and the whole picture rearranges itself in front of you. I knew the name Dawson. That was Brooke's maiden name. Her father, Roy, sold real estate down in the Springs. There were 3 vehicles in front of my cabin. A black SUV I didn't know, a contractor's truck, ladders in the bed, an Adams Subaru, the one I co-signed for, back when co-signing for Sun still felt like love instead of evidence. I parked behind the contractor's truck so nobody could leave without talking to me. I killed the engine, and as I sat there for a second with my hand on the cedar box on the seat beside me, "Well, Walt," I said out loud, "this isn't how I wanted today to go." Then I got out. The front door of my cabin was propped open with a rubber wedge, the kind you see at an open house. Somewhere inside, a man's voice was doing that bright, oily real estate patter, the cadence of a guy who could sell ice to a polar bear. I walked up Walter's porch steps, the ones he'd leveled by hand, and I stood in my own doorway and looked at what they'd done to it. They'd staged it. That's the word, isn't it? Staged. My living room had been emptied of me. The big leather chair Walter died reading in, gone, probably hauled to the shed. In its place, some rented gray sofa with throw pillows in colors no human being actually owns. There were vanilla candles burning on my mantel, a bowl of fake lemons on my table, and the wall where 40 years of our life had hung in mismatched frames, Adam gap-toothed on his first bike, Walter and me sunburned on the Oregon coast, my own mother squinting in her garden. That wall was bare, patched, painted over in a flat gray they probably called agreeable on the can. A heavy-set man in a quarter zip was standing in the middle of my living room with a couple in their 40s, gesturing at my windows like he'd built them himself. Roy Dawson. I'd met him exactly twice, both times at events where he talked the whole time and never once asked me a question. And that's old-growth timber. You can't even get that anymore, Roy was saying. Original owner was a real craftsman. This place has incredible bones. Original owner, past tense. Like Walter was a chapter that had closed. The buyer woman noticed me first. She gave me the polite, uncertain smile you give a stranger who's wandered somewhere they don't belong. Oh, hi, that's when I saw Brooke. She was coming down the stairs from the loft with a roll of painter's tape in her hand, and she was wearing leggings and one of those buttery, oversized sweaters, completely at home, completely comfortable. When her eyes landed on me, her whole face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even guilt. It was irritation. The look you give when the dog gets up on the furniture. Like I was a scheduling problem. Oh my God, she said, not quietly. What are you, Adam? And there was my son. He came out of the kitchen, out of Walter's kitchen, with a coffee in his hand and a contractor's measuring app open on his phone. When he saw me standing in the doorway with my keys still in my fist, every drop of color left his face. He looked like a kid who'd heard a car door slam in a house he was supposed to be alone in. Mom, he said, his voice cracked on the one syllable. Mom, what? You're not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here. Not what are you doing here? Not, oh, thank God you came. Not even I can explain. You're not supposed to be here, at my own cabin, on the anniversary of his father's death, with his father's ashes sitting in a box in my car 40 feet away. Roy turned around then, finally registered that something was off in the room, and put on a smile so wide it should have come with a just sold sticker. Folks, why don't y'all step out onto the deck and take in that view? He told the buyers smoothly, herding them toward the back door, buying himself a minute. Then he turned to me, and the smile shrank to something tighter. Ma'am, I think there's been a little mix-up here. This is a private showing. A private showing. I looked at him. I looked at Brooke, who'd already crossed her arms. I looked at my son, who couldn't hold my eyes. And the cold thing that had started in my chest at the driveway finished spreading all the way out to my fingertips. And what it left behind was not panic and was not heartbreak. Not yet. It was clarity. For 30 years, people had walked into my courtroom and lied to my face, confident they were smarter than the quiet woman taking notes. And every single time, the moment they relaxed, the moment they decided they'd already won, was the moment they handed me the case. I set my keys down on the entry table, the one Walter made from a fallen blue spruce, and I smiled. It was small, it was calm. And I watched Brooke's eyes narrow, because she'd expected screaming or tears, or for me to turn around and leave. She had no idea who she'd just invited to the showing. A little mix-up, I said. Yeah, let's talk about that. Brooke came the rest of the way down the stairs, slow, the painter's tape still hanging off her fingers like she might get back to it the second this interruption was over. Eleanor, she said, and she put a little patience into it, the tone you'd use on a confused old woman at the DMV. Okay, I know this looks like a lot, but you really can't just show up and barge into the middle of a showing. There are buyers out there. Do you have any idea how unprofessional this is? I let that sit in the air for a second. Unprofessional, in my own living room, on the anniversary of Walter's death. Brooke, I said, whose cabin do you think this is? She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, a full circle, and looked at Adam like, can you believe her? Oh my God, don't start. We do not have time for the whole woe is me thing today, okay? Roy has people here. I asked you a question. It's family property, she snapped. Everybody knows that. Adam's going to inherit it anyway. So what's the difference if we move things along a little? You're not even using it. It's just sitting up here rotting while you do your grieving thing in the city. Somebody in this family has to think about money for once. There it was. Somebody has to think about money. I'd heard 1,000 versions of that sentence over 30 years, usually from a defendant explaining why the thing they took was really theirs all along. People always tell you their motive eventually. They can't help it, it leaks. And what money is that exactly? I said. What money are you thinking about, Brooke? Roy stepped in fast, planting his big frame between me and his daughter like he was screening a defender. All right, let's everybody take a breath. That smooth voice dialed down to soothing now. Mrs. Whitlock, Eleanor, can I call you Eleanor? Look, I get it. Emotions are high. We lost Walt, what, a year back? Hell of a thing, hell of a thing. He pressed a meaty hand flat against his own chest like he was the one in mourning. But the kids and I sat down. We looked at the whole financial picture for the family, and we made a decision. This asset, he gestured around at my home like it was a unit in a spreadsheet. This asset is just not working as hard as it could be, and Adam signed off. So really, we're all on the same page here. We just forgot to loop you in. That's on me. My bad. My bad. 65 years old, and he said, my bad. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because of the sheer gall of the thing, the way he'd built a whole little fiction in real time. Family meeting, financial picture, everybody on the same page, and he offered it to me like a gift. He thought he was talking to a grieving widow. He had no idea he was talking to a woman who'd spent 3 decades listening to men exactly like him, explain exactly this kind of story to a jury, and watching the jury not buy a word of it. You looked at the whole financial picture, I repeated. Whose picture, Roy? Yours? I heard the brokerage is having a rough year. I hadn't heard that, actually, but I watched his eye twitch and I knew I'd hit something live. How rough? His smile held, but it went stiff at the corners, the way a smile does when the muscles are doing it on purpose now. Brooke jumped in before he could answer, and her voice came out higher and meaner. You know what? I am so done with this. I'm done. You don't get to walk in here and interrogate my father in our house. It is not your house, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I have never had to raise my voice. It has never been your house. And the fact that you keep saying it like it's true is going to matter a great deal in about 10 minutes. So I'd be careful, if I were you, about how many times you say it out loud. Something in how flat I said it landed. Brooke blinked. For just a second, the script she'd been running glitched. Then she did the thing they always do when the bullying stops working. She reached for the phone. That's it. You're trespassing on a private showing, you're harassing us, and I am calling the sheriff. She had it out, thumb already moving, and she put it on speaker, theatrically, so the whole room could hear her be the victim. I'm not kidding. You want to do this? We'll do this. Please, I said, by all means. In fact, I insist. That stopped her thumb. Just like with the buyers, just like always, they expect you to fold the second authorities on its way. And when you don't, when you actually want the witness in the room, it scrambles them. Brooke stared at me. Behind her, Adam made a small sound, almost a whimper. Brooke, maybe we don't. Shut up, Adam. She didn't even look at him. She dialed. I want you to notice something. In the 4 full minutes she spent on the phone with dispatch, telling them there was an agitated older woman who'd forced her way into a private home, who was being aggressive, who maybe shouldn't be driving at her age. My son said nothing. Roy quietly walked out to the deck and got the buyers moving toward their SUV, damage control. Folks, let's reschedule, family thing, you understand. And Adam stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a coffee mug he'd forgotten he was holding, and he watched his wife describe his mother to the police like I was a stranger who'd wandered off the highway. And he said nothing. I sat down. There was a kitchen chair near the entry, one of mine, Walter's, shoved against the wall to make room for the staging. I pulled it out and I sat in it and I folded my hands in my lap and I waited. calm as a Sunday. That calm did more to unnerve them than any amount of shouting would have. Brooke kept glancing over at me between sentences, and the longer I just sat there, pleasant, patient, the less sure she sounded. It took the deputies 19 minutes. I know because I counted, the way you count when you're waiting on a verdict. When the cruiser finally crunched up the gravel, Brooke flung the door open before they could even knock and put on a whole performance. The relief, the thank you for coming, thank God. Two of them came up the porch steps. The older one was Tom Garrett, 50s, the kind of mustache and gut a man earns over 20 years of small mountain towns where the biggest call most weeks is a bear in a dumpster. The younger one was Sarah Pruitt, sharp-eyed, a notebook already in her hand. I clock them both the way I used to clock a jury pool. Who's tired, who's careful, who's already decided. Garrett had already decided. I could see it in how he came through the door. All right, he said, taking the room in, settling his thumbs in his belt. Who's the homeowner here? Brooke and I said it at the same time. I am, I said. It's a family situation officer. Brooke said over me, fast and warm and reasonable. This is my husband's mom. Honestly, she's been having a really hard time since her husband passed. And she drove up here and kind of lost it on us in the middle of something important. And we just need help getting her to calm down and head home. We're really worried about her. And there it was, the look. Garrett turned to me and his whole face had already softened into that particular brand of condescension I'd watched ruin 100 good cases. The look that says, little old lady, family drama, somebody's confused, this is nothing. Let's all be reasonable and get back to my coffee. He crouched down a little the way you'd talk to a child. Ma'am, he said gentle and slow, I understand today's tough. Nobody's in any trouble here. But you can't just go into other folks' property when they've asked you to leave. Now, do you have anybody we can call to come drive you on home? I have to tell you, I felt the old anger then. Not for me, for every woman my age who'd ever stood in front of a man like Garrett and watched him decide she wasn't credible before she'd said a word. But anger's a tool, and I learned a long time ago to keep it in the drawer until I need the blade. Deputy Garrett, I said. I'd read it off his name tape. I appreciate you coming out. I'm going to make your afternoon very simple, and then I'm going to make it very complicated. And I'd like you to decide which one you want. I reached down beside the chair, into the leather satchel I'd carried in without anybody noticing, because nobody ever notices the quiet woman with the bag. First, the simple part. Do you have any documentation that proves you own this property? I asked the room, but I was looking at Brooke, because I do. I handed Garrett the folder, the deed with my name on it, sole owner. No Walter, no Adam, no Dawson. I'd had it put in my name alone for estate reasons 2 years back, and thank God I had. The county tax records, current paid, my name. The utility bills, my name. 40 years of receipts, that, said Eleanor Whitlock, and nobody else. He flipped through it. The condescension drained out of his face one page at a time. Pruitt leaned in over his shoulder, and I saw the two of them exchange the look, the oh look. This all checks out, Garrett said slowly. He turned to Brooke, and his voice had changed completely. Ma'am, this property's in her name, sole owner. Because she's his mother, she's going to leave it to us anyway. Brooke started. That's not how owning a house works, Pruitt said, not unkindly, but flat. Being someone's heir doesn't give you the right to be here without their say-so, and it sure doesn't give you the right to. Now hold on, I said. Everybody looked at me. I stood up, slowly, because I wanted every eye in that room on me when I said the next part. And because 30 years in front of juries taught me that the difference between a fact people hear and a fact people feel is whether you make them wait for it. Deputy Garrett, you came up here today thinking you were settling a family squabble, a confused widow, a property dispute. Everybody go home and cool off. And if that's all this was, you'd be right to want it handled quiet. I let a beat go by. But I'd like you to ask the question nobody in this room wants you to ask. Out on my driveway, there's a sign that says this cabin is for sale. There were buyers standing on my deck 20 minutes ago. Somebody listed my home on the open market. I turned slow and looked at Roy Dawson, who had gone very, very still over by the windows. So my question for you, Deputy, is this. Who signed the paperwork to sell a property they do not own? The room got quiet in a way that's hard to describe. It's a quiet I've felt maybe a dozen times in a career, the moment a case stops being a misunderstanding and turns into a crime, and everybody in the room feels the floor tilt under them at the same time. Garrett straightened up. The gentle with the old lady was gone. That's a fair question, he said carefully, and now he was looking at Roy too. Sir, you're the agent on that sign out there? I'm I'm the listing broker. Yeah, but everything was done above board, Roy said, and for the first time the smooth voice had a crack running through it. We had authorization. We had a signed listing agreement. Brooke, it's in the binder, get the binder. That was the moment I'd been waiting for, though I didn't yet know exactly what shape it would take. A signed listing agreement. Signed by whom, Roy? Brooke went to the kitchen counter and came back with one of those glossy real estate folders, pulled out a stapled contract, and practically shoved it at Garrett. See? It's all legal, it's notarized and everything. We didn't do anything wrong, she's just. Garrett took it. He read. And I watched his eyebrows pull together, and then he did something that told me everything. He looked up, at me, not at them, at me. Ma'am, he said slowly, this listing agreement's got a signature on it. Says here the seller is. He turned the page toward me, holding it up. Eleanor M. Whitlock. The whole room turned to look at me. I crossed the floor. I took the contract out of Garrett's hands. He let me, which told me he'd already half made up his mind which way this was going. And I looked at the signature on the last page, above the line that said owner-seller. It was my name, in a hand that was not mine. A loopy, careful forgery by somebody who'd seen my signature once, maybe on a Christmas card, and done their best. There was a notary stamp beside it, a date from 3 weeks ago, a date on which I had been at my husband's grave in Denver, 2 hours away, so putting flowers down for what would have been our 42nd anniversary. I have prosecuted forgery. I have prosecuted fraud and elder financial exploitation and conspiracy. I have stood in front of juries and walked them line by line through exactly what makes a piece of paper like this one a felony instead of a misunderstanding. And I felt all of that knowledge settle over me like a coat I'd worn 1,000 times. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that. The angrier I get, the quieter I become. Ask anyone who ever lost to me. Deputy Garrett, I said, I'm going to tell you what you're holding, and I'm going to use small words because I'd like Roy to follow along. I set the contract down on Walter's blue spruce table where everyone could see it. This is a real estate listing agreement for a property I own outright. The seller's signature on it is mine. I did not sign it. I have never signed it, and I have never given anyone, my son, this man, anyone, legal permission to sign my name to anything, which means this signature was forged. I tapped the notary stamp, and it was notarized, which means somebody either lied to a notary about my being there, or the notary stamp itself is fake. Either way, that notary's license number is printed right here, and it will be very easy to find out which. I looked up. In Colorado, deputy, that's forgery, a felony. The fake notary work is its own charge. And trying to sell a home you know you don't own to a buyer writing a real check, that's theft by deception and attempted fraud. And because of my age, the DA can add an extra charge on top of every count, the one for crimes against an at-risk older adult. I smiled, just slightly. I know all this, because that's the office I retired from. You could have heard the candles burn. Roy Dawson opened his mouth, and what came out was the oldest sentence in the book, the one I've heard from 100 defendants in the second before the floor gives out. Now wait. Wait. There's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't, I said. There's been a forgery. Those are different things. One of them's a feeling. The other one's a felony. You should learn the difference before you say another word because Deputy Pruitt over there is writing all of this down. She was, pen moving fast. Garrett took the contract back from the table. Careful now, holding it by the edges the way you hold something you've just realized is evidence. He looked at Roy and at Brooke and at my son standing gray-faced and silent in the kitchen doorway. Then he keyed the radio on his shoulder and stepped out onto Walter's porch to make a call in a low voice I couldn't quite hear. Brooke's certainty had finally cracked all the way through. Adam, she said, and for the first time there was real fear under it, not performance. Adam, say something. And my son, 34 years old, a coffee mug still in his hand, looked at me across the wreckage of his father's living room, and he opened his mouth and nothing came out at all. It took the better part of 2 hours for them to leave. Garrett photographed the forged listing agreement and the notary stamp, bagged the original as evidence, and got names and dates of birth from everyone. He told Roy not to leave the state. He told Brooke that the property belonged to me, that they had no standing to be there, and that they had 30 minutes to load whatever was actually theirs and clear off my land. He said it without heat, the way a man says a thing he's decided isn't his to argue about anymore. Roy tried twice more to spin it. Misunderstanding, family matter. We'll get this sorted, no need for anybody to overreact. And both times Garrett just looked at him until he stopped talking. I didn't watch them pack. I'd seen enough people gather their things in a hurry over the years to know it isn't a thing worth watching. I stood out on Walter's porch with my back to the house and looked at the ridge where I'd meant to scatter him, the aspens going copper in the late light, and I listened to the sounds of my stuffing rented throw pillows into trash bags behind me. Adam was the last one out. He came up beside me on the porch, close enough that I could smell the coffee still on him, and he stood there a while before he managed anything. Mom, his voice was wrecked. Mom, it wasn't supposed to go like this. I swear to God. How is it supposed to go, Adam? I didn't turn to look at him. Walk me through the version where I drive up here on the anniversary of your father's death, find my home gutted and listed for sale with my forged signature on the contract, and it goes fine. He didn't have an answer. He never has an answer, my son. Just a face that crumples and a voice that drops, and the unshakable expectation that the crumpling and the dropping will be enough, the way it always has been. That was Roy, he said finally. And Brooke, the signature thing, Mom, I didn't sign your name. I would never. I didn't even know they'd. I thought we were just talking about it, getting it appraised, seeing what it was worth. It got away from me. It got away from me. He'd been saying that sentence since he was 19. 30 minutes is up, I said. Deputy Pruitt's waiting to follow you down the canyon. Drive safe. The road's slick after rain. He stood there another second, waiting for the thing I didn't give him, the reassurance, the we'll figure it out. Sweetheart, the soft place to land. When it didn't come, he went down Walter's steps and got in the Subaru I co-signed for. The three vehicles pulled out one after another. The cruiser fell in behind them, and I watched the taillights bend around the curve and disappear. And then I was alone on my mountain for the first time in a year. I went inside and I locked the door. And then, I'm not too proud to tell you, I sat down on the floor of my emptied-out living room with my back against the cold stone of Walter's fireplace, and I cried. Not pretty, not quiet. The kind of crying you do when no one's left to perform calm for. I cried for Walter, who'd built this place board by board and didn't live long enough to see his own son try to sell it out from under his ashes. I cried because the cedar box was still in the car and I hadn't done the one thing I came up here to do. And I cried, if I'm honest, for the boy on the bare patched wall, the gap-toothed kid on the first bike, because somewhere between that picture and the man in the Subaru, I'd lost him, and some part of me had always known I'd help do it. Let me tell you about that, because you can't understand the rest of it otherwise. When Adam was 23, he lost his first real job and called me sobbing that he was going to be evicted. I'd just gotten the first raise I'd seen in years, money I'd quietly set aside for a trip, Walter, and I kept promising ourselves and kept postponing. I wired Adam $2,000 instead. Just this once, Mom. I'll pay it back in 2 months. He never did, and I never asked, and that right there was the day I taught my son the lesson that would eventually bring buyers to my deck. That love in this family came in the shape of a check, and that if he cried hard enough, the check would always come. It happened again at 26. Credit card debt, 5 figures, collections calling. I'd just finished paying off our own house and felt, for one glorious month, what it was to owe nothing to anyone. I wrote the check. Last time, Adam. It was never the last time. There was the wedding. Brooke wanted the big one, the barn venue out in Larkspur, the band, the whole circus. and the budget blew up the way those things always do. The $5,000 I'd promised became $50,000 I hadn't. Money that had been the down payment on this very cabin. So that Walter and I waited 3 more years and worked 3 more summers to finally afford the place my daughter-in-law had just tried to flip. You see it, don't you? The shape of it. I built a man who never once had to catch himself, and then I was surprised when he assumed there'd always be a net. The net was me. It was always me. And the cruelest part, the part I sat on that cold floor and finally let myself know, is that the Dawsons didn't invent any of this. They just looked at my son and saw, correctly, that he'd been raised to believe his mother's things were his for the taking. They didn't corrupt him. They recruited him. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the light went and the room went blue and then black, and the cold came up off the stone floor and into my bones. And eventually that same cold is what got me up, because Walter would have been furious to see me catch pneumonia on a floor he'd built me a perfectly good chair to sit in, if they hadn't hauled the chair to the shed. I lit the fire. I made tea in the dark because I couldn't stand the brightness of the overhead lights in that staged stranger's version of my home. And while the water heated, I started carrying Walter's things back in from the shed and the upstairs closet where they'd boxed him up. That's how I found it. They'd stacked the boxes from his study in the loft closet, careless, the way you pack up a man you've decided is finished. His reading chair, his fishing gear, the cigar box where he kept his reading glasses and his terrible drugstore westerns. And underneath all of it, the banker's box from his desk, the one with our papers in it. The boring ones, the ones nobody thinks about until they matter more than anything in the world. The lid was off. It had been gone through. I could tell, because Walter filed like an engineer, and somebody had put things back like a thief in a hurry. I sat down on the loft floor with the box in my lap, and I went through it. And one folder at a time, the real picture, the picture under the picture, came up out of that box and rearranged everything I thought I'd walked into that afternoon. Because the cabin, I realized, was never the main event. The cabin was the test. Here's what I'd half forgotten in the fog of the last grieving year and what they were counting on me forgetting completely. 4 years ago, when Adam and Brooke bought their place in Denver, that pretty 2-story in Wash Park they post on Instagram like they earned it, the bank turned them down. Adam's credit was wreckage. They were $9,000 short of qualifying, and the deal was about to die. And Walter and I, against my better judgment and over his, did the thing parents like us do. We didn't co-sign. I'd learned that much by then. Instead, we became the bank. We loaned them the money to close properly the way I'd have advised any client to do it. A real promissory note, a recorded lien against the house, the whole thing drawn up clean. We held the paper. We were, in plain language, the lender on my son's home. And in the box, paper clipped to our copy of that note, was something that didn't belong to me. 3 printed emails, a loan officer's letterhead, a refinance application half filled in Adam and Brooke's names dated 6 weeks ago, an application to pull every dollar of equity out of the Wash Park house in a cash-out refinance. There were numbers scrawled in the margin in Roy Dawson's heavy hand, and there was a note to Adam in Roy's writing that I read 3 times before it fully landed. Reffies dead in the water till we clear the lien. Talk to your mother or we find another way to move her off the paper. Cabin first, easy money. She won't even notice. One thing at a time. I sat very still on the floor of Walter's loft, holding a piece of paper that turned my whole afternoon inside out. The cabin wasn't the plan. The cabin was the warm-up. Sell it quick and quiet while I was too deep in grief to notice. She won't even notice, and use the cash to plug the hole in Roy's sinking brokerage and buy themselves time. But the real prize, the thing the whole scheme actually needed, was getting Eleanor Whitlock off the paper on that Denver house. Because as long as I held that lien, they couldn't refinance. They couldn't strip the equity. They couldn't turn my son's home into the cash the Dawsons so badly needed to keep their own ship from going under. I wasn't a confused old widow they'd disrespected by accident. I was the single obstacle standing between Roy Dawson and the money he was drowning for. And they'd decided to remove the obstacle the same week she was burying her husband, because that was the week the obstacle would be too sad to see it coming. One thing at a time, I read that line again, and the grief that had had me on the floor an hour earlier, it didn't vanish, but it stepped back and let something cooler and far older take the front of the room. I had spent 30 years taking men like Roy Dawson apart in front of juries, one piece of paper at a time, and Roy had just made the single mistake those men always make. He'd left the paper. I got up off the floor. My knees ached, my eyes were swollen, and the tea had gone stone cold on the counter downstairs. I carried the banker's box down to the kitchen, set it under the good light, and pulled Walter's reading chair back into the spot by the fire where it belonged. Then I sat down with the box, and I took out a legal pad, a habit I'd never managed to break, and at the top of the first page I wrote a single word, the way I'd opened every case file of my career: timeline. Outside, the wind came down off the ridge through Walter's pines, and for the first time all day, it sounded like he was telling me to go get them. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't try. I worked. By the time the sun came up gray over the ridge, I had the whole thing laid out across Walter's kitchen table, the way I used to lay out a case the night before trial. Every document in its place, every date in a column, every lie cross-referenced against the paper that disproved it. 30 years of muscles memory came back like I'd never left. There's a particular calm that comes over me when the chaos finally has edges, when grief and rage get folded down into exhibits. I'd missed it. God help me. Sitting there at dawn with my dead husband's pen in my hand, building the case against my own son's marriage. I felt more like myself than I had in a year. I want to be clear about something, because this is the part people get wrong about me. I wasn't doing this to punish them. Punishment is hot and it's sloppy and it loses cases. I was doing this because for the first time, I could see the whole board. And a woman who sees the whole board and does nothing is just volunteering to be a victim twice. I'd spent my career on the other side of the table, from people who preyed on the grieving and the old and the trusting. And I'll tell you the thing those people bet on every single time. They bet you'll be too ashamed, too tired, too soft-hearted to make it real. They bet you'll want to keep the peace. Roy Dawson had bet his whole sinking business on Eleanor Whitlock wanting to keep the peace. I drove down the canyon that morning and I made it real, one piece at a time. First stop was a woman named Patricia Lowell. Patricia and I tried cases against each other for 15 years before she went into private estate work, and there is no one alive I trust more to be ruthless and quiet at the same time. I sat in her office in Denver with the banker's box on my lap, and I watched her read Roy's note, cabin first, easy money. She won't even notice. And I watched her go very still, the way good lawyers do when the temperature in a case drops. Nell, she said finally, you understand what this is. I understand exactly what it is, Pat. I want to know what we do about it. She set the note down. First thing, before anything else, the trust. Walter and I had a living trust, the ordinary kind. The kind every responsible couple our age sets up so the people they love don't have to fight over anything when they're gone. Everything funneled into it, the cabin, my savings, the note on the Denver house. And under the terms of it, as the surviving spouse, I could change it any time I wanted, for any reason or no reason at all, as long as I was of sound mind. Right now, Patricia said, Adam inherits everything, all of it, including, and I want you to hear this, the very loan they're scheming to get out from under. He'd inherit it clean the day you die. She looked at me over her glasses. How are you feeling about that? I thought about the bare patched wall. I thought about you're not supposed to be here. I thought about my son standing in his father's kitchen with a coffee in his hand while his wife told the police I shouldn't be driving at my age. Take him out, I said. Patricia didn't flinch. She'd known me too long. All of it, all of it. Adam, Brooke, the Dawsons, anyone connected to them. I want a clean document by end of day, signed, witnessed, that leaves not $1 and not 1 square foot to anybody who was in that cabin yesterday. I paused. Walter and I talked once about the hospital up in Estes, the Children's Fund. Build it around that. I'd rather it go to children I'll never meet than to people who already decided what I'm worth. She drew it up that afternoon. I signed a new trust in front of 2 witnesses and a notary, a real one this time, who watched my hand move across the page. And just like that, the inheritance they'd been treating as already theirs, the future they'd been spending in advance, was gone. Not threatened, not held over their heads. Gone. And here is the cold mercy of doing it that way. I never had to tell them. I never had to give them the satisfaction of a fight. They'd simply find out, someday, the way you find out the bridge is out only when you're already in the river. Second stop was the note itself. The loan on the Denver house had a clause in it, a clause Walter, bless his careful heart, had insisted on 4 years ago, against my eye rolling. In plain English, it said this: if the borrowers ever tried to refinance the house or borrow against it again without my written permission, then the entire loan became due immediately. All of it at once. The kind of clause you put in and forget about. And Adam and Brooke had filed a refinance application 6 weeks ago. I had it right there in the box in their own names, with Roy's numbers in the margin. By the plain terms of the note, they had tripped the wire. I had Patricia send the demand letter the next morning. Certified mail, return receipt. It was 2 pages, and it was scrupulously polite, the way the most devastating letters always are. It told the borrowers that I was exercising my right to call the loan due, that the full remaining balance was now owed, and that until it was paid in full, I would not be consenting to any refinance, any sale, or any new borrowing against that house. Not now, not ever, under any terms. Let me put that even plainer for those of you who don't speak contract. I didn't just refuse to get off the paper. I turned the paper into a wall. They could not refinance the Denver house. They could not pull the equity. They could not sell it without paying me off first. The one thing the entire scheme had been built to do, get Eleanor Whitlock off that loan, had just become permanently, legally impossible. And the cash Roy was drowning for, the equity that was supposed to bail out his brokerage, was sealed behind a clause my dead husband wrote because he loved me enough to be careful. Third stop was the one I'd been a prosecutor too long to skip. I drove to the county courthouse, to an office where I still knew half the names on the doors, and I sat down with a deputy DA 20 years, my junior named Angela Reyes, a woman who'd once been a young lawyer carrying my files and now ran the economic crimes unit. I put the forged listing agreement in front of her, the notary stamp with its license number, Roy's note in his own hand, and one more thing. Because Colorado is a one-party consent state, meaning it is perfectly legal for me to record a conversation I'm part of. I'd had my phone recording in my satchel from the moment I walked into that cabin. Every word Roy said about the financial picture, every time Brooke called it their house, the whole afternoon in their own voices. Angela listened to 4 minutes of it and set her pen down. "Nell," she said, "this isn't a family dispute." "No," I agreed. "It's a forgery, a fake notarization, an attempt to sell property by lying, and a plan to financially exploit an older woman. I count at least 6 felonies, and I count them conservatively, which you know I always do." I slid the file across her desk, the way I'd slid 1,000 files across 1,000 desks. "I'm not here for revenge, Angela. I'm here because if this had happened to any other 63-year-old widow in this county, one who didn't know what the law was, one who didn't keep her receipts, it would have worked. He'd have her house by Christmas. So you're going to take the case. Not because it's me, because the only difference between me and the next victim is that I knew where the courthouse was. She took the case, and then for 9 days I did the hardest thing a person in my position can do. Nothing. I went back up the mountain. I let the machine I'd built run without me, the way the law is designed to run, slow and grinding and indifferent to anybody's tears. I made tea. I walked Walter's Ridge. I did not call my son, and I did not answer when he called me. And he called. Oh, he called. The messages piled up as the letters and the visits, and the questions started landing on them, one after another. I listened to them at night by the fire, like dispatches from a war I was no longer fighting in person. This is where the old story you might have heard gets it wrong, by the way. The version where the wronged mother fields call after call, each one more desperate and softens a little each time. That's not what happened, and I want to tell you why, because it matters. I didn't field their pleas. I'd removed myself from the negotiation entirely. There was nothing left to plead to. The trust was changed, and they couldn't unchange it. The loan was called, and they couldn't uncall it. The DA had the file, and I couldn't take it back even if I'd wanted to. And that was the part that finally broke their world open, because the whole scheme had depended on me being a person they could talk to, a soft place, a net, and I had quietly, legally, permanently stopped being one. The consequences didn't arrive as pleas, they arrived as events, and they didn't come one at a time. They came all at once the way a structure fails, not board by board, but all the boards that were holding the weight in the same long second. The certified letter calling the loan due hit the Wash Park house on a Tuesday. By Tuesday afternoon, the loan officer who'd been working their refinance had pulled the application because you cannot refinance a house whose underlying loan has just been called due in full. By Wednesday, Roy Dawson's brokerage, which I would later learn had been floating on fumes and other people's escrow money for the better part of a year, missed a payment it had been counting on that equity to make. By Thursday, a fraud investigator from Angela's office called Roy to schedule what they politely call an interview. And on Friday, Adam called me 11 times. On the 11th, he left a message that wasn't a plea at all. It was a different sound, the sound of a man hearing, for the first time in his life, the floor he'd always assumed was solid come up missing under his feet. Mom, long breath. Mom, they're saying there's an investigator, Mom. Roy's freaking out. He's got a lawyer, and the lawyer told him, Roy's lawyer is telling him to give them me, to say the whole thing was my idea. And Brooke. His voice cracked all the way through. Brooke is screaming at me that I ruined everything, that I should have never let it get to your name, like it's my fault, like I'm the one who, and the bank called about our own house. Mom, they're calling the loan due, so who called it? I don't even understand how. A pause while the truth crept up on him. Did you do that, Mom? Did you do that? I sat by the fire and I listened to my son finally, dimly, begin to understand the size of the woman he'd been raised to think of as a checkbook. I didn't call back. There was nothing left to say to a voicemail. But I knew, the way you know the weather's about to turn, that the silence wouldn't hold much longer, that somebody was going to come up the mountain. And I knew when they did, it wouldn't be to apologize. It would be to make me a final offer. He came up on a Sunday, alone, in the Subaru I co-signed for. I'd been expecting it. I'd watched the weather of it building all week in those voicemails, and I knew the shape of what was coming, because I'd seen it 100 times from the other side of a table. The moment a cornered man stops fighting the case and starts trying to cut a deal. I made a second cup of tea when I heard the gravel. I set it across the table from mine. I am whatever else, still my mother's daughter. And you offer a man tea, even when you already know how the conversation ends. He looked terrible, thinner, gray under the eyes. He stood in my doorway, the door he'd once propped open with a rubber wedge for strangers to walk through, and he didn't come in until I told him to. Mom, he sat. He wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink. Thank you I didn't think you'd let me in. Sit down, Adam. Say what you came to say. And here's where I have to tell you about the thing I was hoping for. Even then, even after everything. Because I'm not made of stone, whatever Brooke thinks, and there is a place in me that is only and always his mother, and that place sat at the table that Sunday and hoped. I hoped he'd come to say he was sorry. Not sorry he got caught, sorry for the thing itself. I hoped my son had finally hit a floor hard enough to wake him up. I'm telling you this so you understand that what happened next I didn't want. I'd have given almost anything for it to go the other way. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he started, and he had the cadence of a man who'd rehearsed it in the car. About everything, about how I let things get out of hand, and how much I hurt you, and I want to make it right, Mom. I want us to be okay. You're all I've got left, with Dad gone, and I can't lose you too. It was a good speech. 2 years ago it would have worked. It had the crumple and the drop and the you're all I've got left, the soft notes that had unlocked my checkbook since he was 19. And I sat there and let it wash over me, and I waited the way I learned to wait through 100 rehearsed defendants. Because the truth never lives in the speech. The truth lives in the ask. You let a man perform his remorse all the way to the end, and then you watch what he reaches for. And that is who he actually is. So here's what I'm thinking, Adam said, and there it was, the turn. So here's what I'm thinking. If we could just, if you'd be willing to tell the DA that it was all a misunderstanding, like a family thing that got blown out of proportion. You don't have to lie, just soften it. Tell them you don't want to press charges. Roy's lawyer says if you do that, the whole thing goes away. And then we can deal with the rest as a family, the loan and everything, and we can. I held up one hand and he stopped. There it was, the ask, not forgive me, not I'm sorry I tried to sell the place where Dad's ashes were going. The ask was call off the investigation, make the felony go away, get me off the hook and we'll figure out the money after. He hadn't driven 2 hours up a mountain to apologize to his mother. He'd driven up to negotiate with a prosecutor, the same way Roy had sent his lawyer to do, and he dressed it up in You're All I've Got Left because he knew which strings on me still played. I looked at my son for a long moment, and the hoping part of me, I felt it close quietly like a door in another room. That's why you came, I said. Not to say sorry, to make me an offer. No, Mom, that's not. I am sorry. I just also you need me to make it disappear. I said it flat, no heat, because if I don't, you're exposed. So your apology has a price tag stapled to it, and the price is my silence. That's not an apology, Adam. I've heard 10,000 apologies in my life, and I can tell you exactly what that is. That's a plea bargain. He opened his mouth. And then I did the thing I'd come to that table prepared to do. The thing I'd hoped I wouldn't have to. Before you say anything else, I said, I want to show you something. Because I think you've half convinced yourself you got swept up in this. That it was Roy's plan, Brooke's plan, that it got away from you like everything always gets away from you. I reached down beside Walter's chair and brought up a single sheet of paper, a printout, and I slid it across the table. Investigators pulled your texts off Roy's phone, Adam. Under a warrant. They're in the file now. Read me the date on that one. He looked down at it, his own words. A text thread between him and Roy. I watched his face as he read it, and I watched it go white, because there is no defending yourself against your own handwriting. Read the date, I said again. Soft, March, he whispered. 7 months ago. I leaned back 7 months ago. 3 months before you started sending me busy, Mom, love you. 5 months before you went quiet on me entirely. You and Roy were already mapping it out. Cabin first while she's still wrecked over Dad. She won't fight it. She's a mess right now. I quoted it from memory because I'd read it enough times that it lived in me now. You picked the date, Adam. You picked the anniversary of your father's death on purpose. Because you decided my grief was the window. You didn't get swept up in anything. You looked at the worst year of my life, and you saw an opportunity. The room was very quiet. The fire popped. Outside, Walter's pines moved in the wind. I was going to scatter your father up on that ridge that day, I said. He's still in the car, Adam. A year, and I still haven't been able to do it. And the one day I finally drove up here to let him go, I walked into a stranger's open house and you did that. Not Roy. Not Brooke. You knew what that day was, and you chose it because of what that day was. He started to cry. Real tears, finally. But I'd been watching people cry across tables my whole career, and I knew these weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of a man watching the last exit close. He cried because there was no version of this where he walked away clean, and some animal part of him had just understood that fully for the first time. Mom, please, he got out. Please, they'll send me to prison. I'm your son, and here is the moment. Here is the whole story, really, in one moment. Because the old me, the woman who wired $2,000 she'd saved for a trip, who paid the credit cards, who turned 5,000 into 15 for a wedding she watched her own home pay for, that woman would have folded right here. He's my son. Those 3 words had opened every check I'd ever written. They were the master key to me. And Adam was turning it in the lock one more time, the way he always had, certain it would work the way it always had. I stood up. You're right, I said. You are my son. I made you. And I have spent the last week sitting up here with that, Adam, really sitting with it, because a lot of how you turned out is on me. I taught you the check always comes. I taught you that crying is currency. I built the net, and then I acted shocked every time you jumped, knowing it'd catch you. That's mine to carry, and I'll carry it. I picked up his untouched tea and carried it to the sink, the way you start clearing a table when the meal is over. But I'm 63 years old, and I have finally learned the lesson I should have taught you 30 years ago. And I'm going to teach it to you now, the only way you've ever been able to learn anything, by letting you feel it. I turned around. I'm not calling Angela. I'm not softening anything. I'm not telling the DA it was a misunderstanding, because it wasn't one. You said so yourself in March in your own words. The trust is changed. You won't inherit a dollar, and neither will she, and there is nothing you can say at this table that will change it, because it's already done, and it was done by my hand, and my hand is steady. The loan is called. I will not consent to your refinance. Not this year, not in 10 years, not ever, and the case is the DA's now, not mine. I couldn't stop it if I wanted to. And Adam, look at me. I don't want to. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. You came up here to find the soft place, I said. I want you to drive back down knowing there isn't one anymore. Not because I stopped loving you. Because I finally understood that what you and I have been calling love was just me paying your bills. And that the kindest thing, the last genuinely loving thing I have left to give you, is to let you stand in the wreckage you built and find out who you are when no one comes to save you. I hope you find someone in there worth becoming. I won't be there to watch, but I hope it for you. I do. He left the way they all leave, slowly, like his feet weighed too much. He stopped at the door, Walter's door, and turned back once, the way he had as a boy when he wanted me to call him back. To say, come here, it's okay, it's always okay. I didn't call him back. The Subaru pulled out and bent around the curve and was gone. I stood at the window until the dust settled on the gravel road. And then I picked up the cedar box off the passenger seat of my car, and I carried my husband up the ridge behind the cabin he built with his own two hands. And in the last gold light of an October afternoon, with the aspens burning all around me, I finally let Walter go where the wind could find him. I'd like to tell you the rest tied up neat. It didn't. Roy Dawson's lawyer did exactly what his lawyer said he'd do. He gave them Adam. He gave them Brooke. He cut his own deal and walked with probation and a fine, while the younger two took the weight, because that's what men like Roy always do. They sell the kids to save the suit. The brokerage went under anyway. Brooke filed for divorce before the case even resolved. Not out of conscience, but because she wanted distance from the felonies. Her last words to me, passed through a lawyer, were that I was a cruel, bitter old woman who'd destroyed her own family. And she never once, not in any document, not in any deposition, not in any moment, said she was sorry. The Dawsons never apologized. They are not, I have come to understand, people who are built to. Some people aren't. And Adam took a plea. He'll carry it. We don't speak. He sent one letter months later, and I read it standing at the mailbox. 4 paragraphs of his lawyer's careful language about moving forward and healing as a family, and not one sentence in it that acknowledged the date he chose, or the box in my car, or the words he wrote in March. So I put it in the fire, not in anger, the way you finally throw out a thing you kept too long. People ask me, the few who know, whether I have peace now, and I do. But I want to be honest with you about what kind, because the movies sell you the warm kind, the kind with the reconciliation and the tearful hug at the end, and everyone learning their lesson. That's not the peace I have. The peace I have is colder than that, and it's mine. And I built it the same way Walter built this cabin, board, by hand, slow, because I wanted it to last. I'm Eleanor Whitlock. I'm 63 years old. I spent my life making the world safe for other people, and it took burying my husband and losing my son to finally make it safe for me. I don't regret it. I sleep through the night now. The walls got the pictures back up, all of them, even the gap-toothed boy on the bike, because that boy was real and he was mine, and I get to keep him, even if I had to let the man go. The fire's warm, the mountain's quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, the only person I have left to take care of is the one I should have started with. I've read a lot of these stories. This one stays with me, and I think I finally know why. We're all taught that forgiveness is the high road, that family earns infinite chances. But forgiveness was never the lesson here. The lesson is darker, and it's this. Grief doesn't just break your heart, and it makes you visible to the wrong people. They didn't strike when Nell was strong. They waited until she was burying her husband. That's not a mistake somebody apologizes their way out of. That's a choice. What I admire isn't that she got even. It's that she never once raised her voice. She just stopped paying for people who'd already decided she was disposable. So let me ask you honestly, is there someone in your life you keep rescuing, hoping they'll finally see your worth? Tell me below. I read every comment. And if Nell's story moved you, you know what to do.